am talking today on the second talk on leadership, and I am going to talk about where leadership goes wrong, where sometimes we abuse our power. So I just want to say that at the get-go, and I know that for some people that is a very real and live experience, and that actually even being in a church is a really brave decision. So I just want to say that from the get-go. I hope I'm going to be sensitive, but I just wanted to say it. As I said, it's the second talk in our series on leadership, and it has the happy title, The Seduction of Power. As Matt said last week, and if you didn't hear it, go back and listen to it, it's very good. It is partly in response to the revelations that have come out about Soul Survivor and Mike Pilavarchi. As we know, or if you've been in the church for a while, you'll know, he is sadly not the first prominent Christian leader to have abused his power. But for us in the charismatic evangelical wing of the church, it was particularly devastating. Many people from our church will have gone to Soul Survivor as teenagers, and we took many groups of young people to Soul Survivor there ourselves. And as Matt said last time, if there is anyone who has been directly impacted by the situation, who hasn't yet felt able to talk to anybody, then please know that you can talk to any one of the clergy team. So that's John, Matt, Kirsty, Andy, Kristen. You can talk to, and there's also a national safeguarding team that you can talk to. You can also talk to me, and I'm sort of here this evening, kind of in my safeguarding. I'm in charge of the staff safeguarding. I'm the staff safeguarding lead. I don't know if Libby's here. Is Libby here? Okay, Libby, who's not here, is the other safeguarding lead. But anyway, I'm just one half of the two people, but you've only got me tonight. But there's also a national email, safeguarding@churchofengland.org. So if you do want to, and you feel like it's time and you're now able to tell your story, then you can do it there. Okay, so as a result of what has been happening, we have been thinking through, as a leadership team, what does godly leadership look like? And hopefully, how can we cultivate this kind of leadership in our church and in ourselves? Because the thing is, some of the problematic patterns of behaviour in Soul Survivor were hidden in plain sight. People would say, oh, that's just Mike. You know, everyone knows that. And it was this hiddenness in full view, or in partial view, I'd say, actually not full view, that led to young men being hurt and abused for way too long. And I have been personally quite obsessed in thinking about what's hidden in plain sight in my life. What is hidden in plain sight in the life of St. Mary's? And we've also been grappling with the challenge of how we continue to exercise the freedom of the Spirit. We're a charismatic church. We want people to, like we're doing ministry training on Wednesday. On Wednesday, I'm imagining, because I've been there before, you'll be encouraged, you will hear some teaching about what we believe the Spirit does with, can speak to us and how he might use us, and then we're inclined to have a go. Will you get it right? Probably not. Not all the time, because we're trying to walk in sync with the Spirit, right? And that involves taking risks, and that involves sometimes getting it wrong, and that's okay. So we want to encourage that. We want to disciple people. We want to nurture people. That always involves a bit of mess, but that's okay. And we want the freedom to live, to be Christians, bringing in the kingdom in that way, but we also want to make sure it's safe. So I've been kind of grappling with, how do we do that? How do we hold those two things together? Because in some ways, it's more risky being a charismatic, right? There's more risk involved. We can't control what everyone says to people up the front. There is more risk, and it's more tricky. So how do we do it in a safe way? How do we reconcile these two really important things? Well, I want to suggest that we reconcile them in this way, and this is the way we've been thinking about it. The bit in the middle of is it a Venn diagram? Yes, it is, isn't it? The bit in the middle, the intersection, as apparently it's called. I learnt that this morning. See, if you speak twice, you get feedback from the congregation, you actually learn more. Is what I'm calling walking in the light. And I think it's really important for us to know what that looks like, both as a church. So don't worry, this is not just the church. This is not just our, staff team thinking, but it's also for us in our lives, because we all have power in our lives, and I'm going on to talk about that in a bit. So what we need is to live in the intersection between the two. So I'm going to give you an example. Say, one gift day morning, John is praying, and he thinks that God is saying, we're going to actually raise all the money in one session. Be quite unusual, but it has happened. So what does John do? Does he think, oh, no, that's a bit risky, not going to do that? Just, let's not say that. Or does he stand up and say, look, I think that God might be about to do something quite extraordinary. And if God did do that and call different people in the congregation to give the whole amount in one morning, that really is, take it from me, I've been leading a church for a long time, quite extraordinary. That is a work of God. But you could either see that as an act of great faith, or you could see it as potentially abusive. And it's all to do with how John does it. So the way John would do it, if he has done it and would do it, going on forward, this morning apparently I suggested that it might actually have been abusive. Anyway, I'm not trying to suggest that. I'm saying look at the context. So if he stands up and says, look, I think God might be saying this, I could be wrong. And you know what? The other really important thing is congregation. I can't do a John voice. What does he do? He does it with his hands like that. Is to not to feel guilted into giving. We believe in St. Mary's that you are not obliged to give. We invite people to give. We think it's really good for us to give. But actually, I don't want anyone, me saying this, I don't want anyone to feel that they have to give in order to make this happen, etc., etc. So whereas if he stood up there and said, God has told me this, and if you don't do it, then you're sinning, it's actually going to be a terrible thing. That is abusive, right? So it's all to do with how we do it, but it's still stepping out in risk. Is that okay? Explain that. Thanks. And we need to set it in the general culture of grace. So I'm thinking about how we do that and how we live like that. Now, if we think that struggles with misusing power are just the church, in the last few years, here are some of the things that just in the UK, and let's face it, we could go far wider, but let's just stick to the UK for now. Here are some abuses of power. We've had the Hillsborough inquiry, Hillsborough disaster and then inquiry, the PPE scandal, the infected blood scandal, and the post office scandal. Now, before you think I'm being political in what is a general election campaign, 3 of those were carried on through 4 years. The infected blood scandal started in the 1970s, so it carried on 4 years under successive governments. And I think what the consistent factor is, a mistake is made, and instead of going, oh my goodness, I think we've made a mistake, I actually think this is happening. What people in power have done is they have then acted to kind of try and hide that mistake. And so then all their focus becomes on hiding the mistake and keeping the little people away. And, so it takes people like the guy, I can't remember the name of the guy, but the guy who did the post office scandal, to be one of those people who is just Alan Bates, isn't it? Alan Bates, yeah. Thank you very much for the nods. I think he's the sort of person who is really persistently irritating. He wasn't going to accept it. He knew he wasn't in the wrong, and he carried on basically plugging away and plugging away and plugging away. But it wasn't actually until there was a television program on it that people started falling over themselves to say, oh my gosh, that's absolutely terrible, that's awful, terrible. But it wasn't until that point. And so we all need help here. And if we, the church, really are going to make a difference and going to be salt and light in our country, then we really do need to get it right ourselves. So let's turn to Jesus, because it's always a good place to start. Okay, the reading today is from Matthew 20, and it's verses 17 to 28. Now, Jesus was going to Jerusalem. On the way, he took the 12 aside and said to them, we're going to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and will turn him over to the Gentiles to be mocked and flogged and crucified. On the 3rd day, he'll be raised to life. Then the mother of Zebedee's sons came to Jesus with her sons, and kneeling down, asked a favor of him. What is it you want? He asked. She said, grant that one of these 2 sons of mine may sit at your right and the other at your left in your kingdom. You don't know what you're asking, Jesus said to them. Can you drink the cup I'm going to drink? We can, they answered. Jesus said to them, you will indeed drink from my cup, but to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared by my Father. When the 10 heard about this, they were indignant with the 2 brothers. Jesus called them together and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So if we want to live in that intersection, we first have to learn what power is not. And I would suggest this is a good Bible story that kind of points to it. So James and John, mighty disciples that they are, I would say, who thinks that their mother put them up to, who thinks it was a pushy mother? We're going to do a little vote. Pushy mother? Oh, a few votes. This morning, there were no votes for pushy mother. Who thinks it was James and John and they just manipulated their mother to do it? Wow. You can vote. There's no right or wrong here, except I do think it was James and John who put the mother up to it. And I've got the microphone, so that's my power. I'm locating my power, see? I think it's very unlikely that she came up with the idea on herself. I think it is very likely that they said, go on, Mum, go on, just ask him. She's like, no, I'm not going to. And, but she does anyway. And yet she gets the blame. Notice it is a mother's request in the title of that particular section of the Bible, and that is the patriarchy right there in action. I personally have a story of a mother's request when my 9-year-old daughter was at Sylvia Young Saturday School, and she really loved acting, and she was in this kind of improv class where I swear they didn't do anything apart from, improv, not a lot of preparation. Anyway, it was very expensive. Anyway, she comes back one day and she goes, oh, Mum, can you see if I can get an agent? And I was like, excuse me? She goes, no, everyone in my class has an agent. And they all get, acting work. And I really want to have an agent. And I'm thinking, kill me now. I am not going to go to Sylvia Young, who's quite famous and has, put forward lots of people, and say, hello, excuse me, my daughter, would it be okay if my little precious daughter had an agent? She's terribly gifted. And she said, no, please, Mum. So I do. And honestly, the look she gave me was, it was really bad. But anyway, she actually did act as an agent, because the agency acted as they had an agency connected to them. And actually Zoe made quite a lot of money out of it, so it was all good in the end. But it was really, really embarrassing at the time, at that moment. So I think I identify with the mother more than I identify with James and John in this story. And to us, I don't know about you, but to us, looking from a 21st century perspective, we might kind of think, how could they get it so wrong? Despite the fact that they've had this bespoke mentoring and discipleship program orchestrated by Jesus, were they really that stupid? Why couldn't they get what he was trying to say? Why did they think that because they'd attached themselves to Jesus, they were about to start exercising serious power when he entered Jerusalem? Now, to understand why, it's actually pretty reasonable from their perspective. We need to understand the belief system as Jewish believers at the time. They believed that if they lived a life honoring to God, rewards on earth would follow. They did not have our concept of heaven, and they thought that Jesus was coming to overthrow the Romans and establish his kingdom on earth. Plus, a mere chapter before this conversation, Jesus himself had actually promised the following. Jesus said to them, I tell you the truth, at the renewal of all things, when the Son of Man sits on his glorious throne, you who have followed me will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel, and everybody who has left houses or brothers or sisters or father or mother or children or fields for my sake will receive 100 times as much and will inherit eternal life. But many who are first will be last, and many who are last will be first. So to be fair, it wasn't an unreasonable expectation. Jesus had promised them a throne at the renewal of all things. And they thought that. They were probably at the renewal of all things, because you know what? Jesus was about to go into Jerusalem. Jesus was about to establish God's kingdom. And so they were about to have their throne. So it was like they booked their train ticket, but they just needed to book, do I want a forward-facing one or do I want a plug? It didn't seem, plus James and John were kind of in Jesus's in crowd. So Jesus had 3 disciples that he was very particularly close to. James, John and Peter, they just had the transfiguration. They get to go up the mountain. All the other 9 stay behind. They are the special ones. And especially John, who always described himself as a disciple who Jesus loved, which I have a problem with, but I think it shows a fantastic confidence in Jesus' love for him. So it's not unreasonable. It wouldn't be unreasonable for them to sit either side of Jesus. But to us, it kind of feels like, oh, that's a bit presumptuous. However, actually wasn't, as much as it was reasonable for them to assume that that might be happening, it really wasn't how it was going to work in the kingdom. So notice how Jesus, being smart and knowing who is actually behind this, I would say, directs his reply directly back to the disciples without going through their mum. Jesus has a very good, Jesus can cut right to the heart of things. He says, can you drink the cup of suffering that I must drink? And this Jesus question is simply his way of saying, in a nice way, I'm not sure that you totally get this. I'm not sure that you completely understand what my kingship is about. You see, the Old Testament prophets had warned about this cup of wrath, or the cup of Yahweh's wrath. They described a time when God, grieving over a sin-filled world, steps in at last to give the violent and the bloodthirsty, the arrogant and oppressors, the reward for their ways and deeds. It's as if God's holy anger against such people is turned into wine, bitter wine, that will make them drunk and helpless. They will be forced to drink every drop as a vindication for the poor and helpless. And we know that in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus prayed, Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. And then, as we all know as well, he went on to pray lines of utter submission, yet not as I will, but as you will. On the cross, Jesus drank the cup of wrath down to the last drop so that we wouldn't have to, that we could be made right with God. So drinking from the cup of wrath is not something we should be glibly signing up to do. Now, I'm guessing at this point, I don't know if you've ever been in a conversation where you're suddenly thinking, this is not going quite as I'd expected. Thought Jesus might say, yeah, you can go on the left and you can go on the right. And now he's starting to talk about the cup of wrath. But they just double down, as we've all done maybe in difficult conversations. Yeah, sure, yeah, we can do that. Yeah, absolutely. Cup of wrath, bring it on. And that leads to Jesus kind of laying it out a little bit more in verse 23. Sorry, there aren't the verses on because I couldn't work out how to do it. And then after the other disciples have actually found out what they asked and got, understandably, a little annoyed, then basically talks about the servant thing, talks about the first, talks about all the things. I have to get my glasses back on. Whoever wants to be great must be your servant. Whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to serve, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. So leadership, the Jesus way, is not like any leadership that you have seen or that you could imagine. It's not about using your power and prestige. It's about servanthood and sacrifice. But did Jesus mean that he was the servant of the disciples? Someone that they tell what to do? I think the rest of the Gospels don't appear to suggest that. Jesus retained his power, but he knew how to use it. And he used it sacrificially and for the good of all. And that's the key for us, I think, when we're thinking about power. Matt also addressed this in his talk. So if you, I definitely would go back and hear that. So how do we use the power that we have in a good way, in a Jesus way? And I'm going to think of it both from a St. Mary's perspective and from a personal one. So first off, number one, do a power check. As human beings, I would suggest we are fairly useless when it comes to exercising power in a godly way. I believe that human beings are made in the image of God, and we are extraordinarily and wonderfully made. And we are also, at times, profoundly stupid. When it comes to exercising power, we don't even recognize the power that we have. And so often, we unwittingly use it in ways that's unhelpful. We are always more comfortable thinking about what we don't have than what we do. I am more comfortable saying patriarchy than other things. Because you know what? I'm in that one thing, I'm in a position of less power. And it's also a joke in our family. I'm training to be a systemic family therapist. So that means a core part of this training is helping us think through what our blind spots are, what our prejudices are, what our own power and privilege is. And to be honest, it's been quite an uncomfortable experience. So I want you to look at these ones. These are called the social graces. This is something which we have to talk about in every essay that we write, and we have to think about in every session that we run with people. So the social graces are as follows: gender, geography, race, religion, age, ability, appearance, class and culture, ethnicity, education and employment, sexuality and sexual orientation, spirituality. And we have to think about, what power do I have here? What power do I have in the terms of the dominant narrative? What power do I exercise? And how do I then exercise it in a more helpful way? Now, as we know, power is quite multi-layered, and there'll be some situations where it's intersectional, and we have a complexity that we have to deal with. But I think the first point is to really think. Quite often you'll think, well, which one am I drawn to there? Which one do I really think about the most? If I'm a woman, I might think about gender. Gender is a really important thing. But we might think, why am I thinking? Then you have to be so self-reflexive, you drive yourself slightly stir-crazy after a while. Why am I thinking about that one? Why am I particularly picking up that one? Are there other ones I'm not thinking about, etc., etc.? In lockdown, I went to one meeting of Extinction Rebellion because it was lockdown, and anyway, there was an Extinction Rebellion meeting in our street. And at the time, we lived in a very, very nice cul-de-sac in Highgate. And it was all just the local. We were setting up a Highgate branch of Extinction Rebellion. And I go along on Zoom, and it was a hilarious experience. But they were basically talking about, and there was a lot of the things that Extinction Rebellion are concerned about and want to challenge that I definitely would have some echo with. But they just kept talking about the elite. We've got to show it to the elite. And I'm thinking to myself, you're living in houses that are worth £2 million. You are the elite. Why can't you see that why can't at the very least you can say something about, obviously we're really wealthy, but, I just don't think they would see it. So anyway, I actually volunteered to make a banner for them, because I do like making banners, but I never did it. I had to leave. It was too much. So I think we're always more comfortable thinking about where we don't have power than where we do. But we need to actually be brave and look at it if we really want to lead in the Jesus way. Now, as a leadership team, I am absolutely certain that we have made assumptions and decisions based on our own prejudices and our own blindness. And I'm not certain because I think the leadership team are rubbish, but because the leadership team are human beings. So there will be things that we've missed, and there will be things that we need to address. So that's the first thing. We need to actually, and everyone has power. We all have power in some ways. You might feel very powerless in a lot of ways, but I think it's really good to actually be brave and think about it. Number 2, embrace nuance. So I think one of the problems in our current culture is that we're either in or we're out. We're either a perpetrator or we're a victim. And the horrible, unpalatable truth is that we can be both. And I think that's probably easier for me to see because I'm old than it is when you're younger. I don't think it's as easy to see when you're young, but I think it remains true nonetheless. And the in or the out way of thinking means that we spend all our focus and energy on making sure we convince ourselves and others that we're in. So here is a list of questions. And as you can imagine, with the whole Soul Survivor thing, there's all these things that have been going around to leaders, trying to work out if you're a toxic leader or not. And here are the questions that we have to answer about toxic leadership. Am I wrestling with the entitlement I carry? Am I submitting myself willingly, joyfully, and transparently? Am I regularly proximate to people I get no social capital from? Am I living at the center of God's affirming love? Or am I rapaciously seeking affirmation? And the thing is, you just want to make sure you answer the questions in the right way so that you're in, so that you're not a toxic leader. But the problem is, it's just not that helpful. And actually, I think that there's more of a sliding scale. So I think there is things that I will do that will be unhelpful. There are things that I will do that will be very unhelpful. And there are things that I will do that will be actually pretty good. I hope I haven't got right down to the level of abusive, but I think it's a continuum. And we need to be brave and have a look at ourselves and say, this is where I am. Or I think that was there. Rather than, oh my gosh, I need to convince myself whether I'm in or out. So this is a spectrum of behavior, and I'm not going to go into it in great detail, but I do want to actually give you a definition of spiritual abuse. And we've just instituted a spiritual abuse policy for St Mary's and pastoral guidelines for St Mary's, and you can access them via the website if you're interested, and the PCC has debated them and voted on them, because I think it's really important that we're really clear about what we mean by spiritual abuse, and that we as a church are determined to live and work in such a way so that we're not actually spiritually abusing people. It feels like basic, but I'm not sure that it is right now. So I'm just going to read you out the definition of spiritual abuse. Well, this is from the Church of England. Spiritual abuse is a form of emotional and psychological abuse characterized by a systematic pattern of coercive and controlling behavior within a religious context. Spiritual abuse often exploits religious beliefs, scripture, and divine position or spiritual authority, employs spiritual threats, fear, or of spiritual consequences, and the suggestion that God is complicit in manipulating and controlling individuals. And there's a little bit more, which I'm not going to go on to read because I need to come into land soon. Meanwhile, there is healthy behavior, which I've just called the Jesus way. There is unhelpful behavior when you might come to me, I'm having a bad day, and I'm actually a bit dismissive or a bit rude or a bit unhelpful. That is unhelpful. Then we might have unhealthy, where we're actually beginning to see patterns involved in what's going on. And then there's abusive. And I know that there will be people here who have suffered spiritual abuse. I hope it hasn't been in St. Mary's, but as I said at the beginning, I know that it means that even coming into church can be a really brave thing. And I'm sorry, as a church leader, that has happened to you. And I'm sorry that is your lived experience. It is not godly. What spiritual abuse is not, just to kind of spell it out, is, for example, if I want to be a member of the worship team, and I'm tone deaf, so I can't pitch songs. I don't ever stand near me in worship. That's why John sits at the back. No, not really. But if I go to Matt and say, Matt, I really, really think that God wants me to be a worship leader. I love worship, and I want to do BVs. I think I'm going to be really good. And Matt goes, but, I'm not trying to be rude, Jenny, but you can't sing. Is that spiritual abuse? I think not. I think that's saving all of you from what might be going on. Or let's get it a little bit less kind of crazy than me. I did once audition for a worship thing, but we won't go into that now. Say you really, really want to be on the life team, but you've never actually invited a non-Christian to anything ever because it's just not your thing. There's lots of people are really good evangelistically and other people aren't as gifted. You've also never really thought about how to explain the gospel in a way that's kind of relevant or open to, non-Christians. But you really kind of would like to be on the life team. And you have a conversation and you're very nicely told that actually we're not sure that right now that is for you. It doesn't seem to completely fit you. Is that spiritual abuse? No. That is trying to discern what people's gifts are. Because spiritual abuse is a definite thing, and we absolutely have to guard against it. But it also doesn't mean that decisions aren't made. I suppose that's just what I'm saying. The final thing is we need to give and receive feedback. The brilliant thing on white fragility by Dr. Robin DiAngelo talked about how white people choose to define racism in such a way as it had to be intentional. So if I, as a white person, upset, ride over, or offend someone, it wasn't racist unless I, the white person with the power, decided it was. Genius. Genius. Because then, if a person of colour, and I'm just using that expression for now, needs to address something, then it can become all about how it makes the white person feel, not what they did in the first place, which was actually the problem. Right? It's genius. It stops us facing it. And it's really, really common. I think Jesus' parable of the speck in your eye and the plank, getting a speck out of someone's eye and you've got a massive plank in yours, is that kind of thing. I think we can all agree that that's not that helpful. That's not a helpful way to respond. It's not an open way to respond. But evading facing our part in how we hurt people is what we do in all our relationships. If I hurt John, and I did recently, when he said, should we have a day out together? And I said, because we hadn't really seen each other because I've been really busy with this course. And I say, well, the thing is, I haven't really seen the dog very much recently, and he's been a bit neglected. And so, I don't know that I can be away from him for another day. And John just looks at me and says, are you actually preferring the dog to me? And I'm like, now if I say, oh, John, that's not hurtful, don't be silly. That's not hurtful. That is not the most helpful thing. But, you have to be able to acknowledge, we have to, learning, I have a tutor who I really like, and she said this. Learning to listen non-defensively to loved ones telling us how we hurt them is a skill we need to keep learning our whole lives. And I would say that's a skill we need to learn on a broader level. Nearly into lands. Thinking about feedback, it might also be that we need to give feedback. Now, that is a difficult thing to do, especially if it's something where it's quite potentially hurtful or painful. But I think as Christians, we need to be able to do it. And we, as a leadership team, are saying to you, if there are things that you have noticed which have hurt you, or there are systems that you think are in place which you feel are unfair, then please talk to us. We want to, we cannot see our own blind spots. So we are inviting you to do that. And I would just invite you to be brave and do that. But I do understand that that is a big thing. So it might be you could talk to a clergy person. Maybe if you're on a team anywhere, talk to the person leading that team. Talk to anyone that feels safest to you. And we can, we're really open to hearing about it. And finally, we're going to God. In the training course that I do, we have to do, as I said, lots of self-reflexivity, which is a great process. But actually, as Christians, it's great. Because you know what? We have a way of going straight to the God who knows us. And in Psalm 139, when the psalmist talks about all the things the person knows about, God knows about him. And then he says at the end, search me and know me. See if there is any offensive way in me and lead me in life eternal. And we can do that with God. So if God calls us to lead in whatever capacity that he does, then we know that he will give us his spirit to empower us and often to just nudge us and think, oh, I'm not sure that was good. I'm not sure that was right. I'm not sure that was helpful. I'm not sure that was leading in the way that Jesus led. Amen.